The decision that froze one of the most important waterways on Earth was not announced with a speech. There was no declaration of war, no televised address, no fleets mobilizing across the Persian Gulf. Instead, the signal came quietly from Tehran. Somewhere inside a heavily guarded compound in the Iranian capital, the country's supreme leader authorized the activation of a strategy, prepared for decades. A strategy designed for one purpose: to make the Strait of Hormuz too dangerous for the world to use. Within hours of that decision, something strange began happening across the Persian Gulf. Ships slowed. A tanker approaching the strait delayed its entry. A container vessel reduced speed and waited for instructions. Shipping companies began calling their captains. Hold position. At first, it looked like routine caution. Then it spread. More ships stopped moving. More tankers dropped anchor. More crews waited for orders that never came. Within a single day, the busiest energy corridor on Earth began to fall silent. On March 7th, observers standing on the cliffs of Oman's Musandam Peninsula described a surreal sight. The sea below looked calm. The sky above was clear. But across the horizon, massive steel hulls dotted the water. Oil tankers, LNG carriers, cargo ships sitting motionless at sea. More than 200 vessels, engines idle, anchors down, cargo worth billions stranded on the water. Nothing appeared to be blocking the Strait of Hormuz. There were no battle fleets sealing the passage, no armada closing the entrance. The strait was physically open, yet nobody was willing to sail through it. To understand why the world reacts so violently to disruptions here, you have to look at the map. The Persian Gulf is one of the most energy-rich regions on the planet. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates together produce an enormous share of the world's US oil and natural gas, but almost all of that energy has only one exit: a narrow stretch of water separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula, from the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, the strait is just 21 miles wide. But the massive supertankers carrying the world's energy cannot sail anywhere within that space. They must follow deep-water shipping lanes that are far smaller, just 2 miles wide in each direction. 2 narrow corridors of water that carry one of the largest flows of energy on Earth. Every single day, roughly 21 million barrels of oil pass through this passage. That is nearly 1/5 of the petroleum the world consumes. Tankers leaving the Gulf carry crude oil to refineries in India, China, Japan, and South Korea. Liquefied natural gas ships transport fuel to Europe and Asia. Container vessels carry goods moving through the arteries of global trade. The modern economy depends on these waters staying open. If traffic through the strait slows, the reaction is immediate. Oil prices surge, shipping costs jump, governments begin scrambling to secure supply, and there is another critical detail: geography favors Iran. The entire northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz belongs to the Islamic Republic. Mountains rise above the shipping lanes like natural watchtowers. From those cliffs, Iranian radar systems, drones, missile batteries, and naval units can observe nearly every vessel entering or leaving the Gulf. For centuries, Persian rulers understood a simple strategic truth: whoever controls Hormuz holds enormous leverage over global trade. For years, analysts believed Iran could never truly close the strait. The logic seemed obvious. The United States Navy dominates the region. American aircraft carriers patrol nearby waters. Destroyers escort commercial shipping. Submarines operate silently beneath the surface. Against this overwhelming naval power, Iran's conventional fleet appears small. If Tehran attempted a traditional naval blockade, most experts assumed it would be destroyed within hours. But that assumption misunderstood Iran's strategy. Iran never planned to defeat the US Navy in open battle. Instead, Iranian military planners developed a doctrine built around a different idea: asymmetric warfare, the art of defeating a stronger opponent without confronting them directly. Instead of matching the enemy's strength, you attack the systems that support them. You avoid the battlefield where your opponent is strongest, and instead create a battlefield they refuse to enter. For decades, Iranian strategists studied the global shipping system moving energy through Hormuz. They examined tanker operations, insurance markets, and the way shipping companies calculate risk. And slowly a different strategy emerged, one that did not require a massive navy, one that did not require physically blocking the waterway. Instead, it relied on something much more powerful: fear. You do not need to sink every tanker. You only need to convince shipping companies that their vessels might be attacked. Convince insurers that the risk has become unacceptable. Convince captains that entering those waters could be the most dangerous decision of their careers. Once that fear spreads through the shipping industry, the system shuts itself down. Ships stop moving. Insurance disappears. Cargo contracts freeze. And suddenly, the world's most important energy corridor becomes a place nobody wants to sail. Back on the cliffs of Oman, the stillness of the water hides the beginning of a much larger crisis. Because Iran has not closed the Strait of Hormuz with warships, it has begun closing it with uncertainty. And the most dangerous part of the strategy is only just beginning. The paralysis spreading across the Strait of Hormuz did not happen by accident. It was engineered. For decades, Iranian military planners studied one specific vulnerability in the global economy. They understood that modern trade does not move purely on steel ships and powerful engines. It moves on confidence, on contracts, on insurance, on risk calculations made in offices thousands of miles away from the ships themselves. If those calculations change, the entire system can grind to a halt. And Iran realized something crucial about the Strait of Hormuz. You do not need to destroy every tanker passing through the waterway. You only need to create the belief that any tanker could be next. Once that uncertainty enters the system, the reaction spreads faster than any missile. To make that happen, Iran built a military toolkit specifically designed for this narrow stretch of water. It is not a conventional navy meant to fight fleet battles. Instead, it is a network of cheap, flexible weapons capable of threatening ships from the air, the sea, and the coastline all at once. One of the most visible tools in this strategy is the drone. Over the past decade, Iran has quietly become one of the world's largest producers of military drones. Among the most widely known is the Shahed 136, a simple loitering munition designed to travel long distances before diving directly into its target. These drones are not particularly sophisticated compared to Western military systems. They are relatively crude machines with small engines and basic guidance, but they are extremely effective. A Shahed drone can travel roughly 1,000 kilometers before striking its target. That range allows it to reach almost any vessel operating anywhere in the Persian Gulf. But the real advantage lies in cost. A single Shahed drone costs roughly $20,000 to produce. Intercepting it often requires firing a sophisticated missile from a naval defense system, sometimes costing several $1,000,000. That creates a brutal imbalance. Iran can launch large numbers of inexpensive drones, forcing its adversaries to spend vastly more money trying to stop them. In a prolonged confrontation, that imbalance becomes a form of economic pressure all on its own. But drones are only one piece of the system. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates a fleet designed specifically for swarm tactics. Instead of relying on large warships, they deploy dozens of small, fast attack boats that can maneuver rapidly through the narrow waters of the Gulf. These boats move in groups, they surround larger ships, they approach quickly, often at unpredictable angles. Against a massive oil tanker hundreds of meters long, a single speedboat may seem insignificant. But when 20 or 30 appear at once, armed with rockets, machine guns, and anti-ship missiles, the situation changes instantly. For the civilian crew of a commercial tanker, the sudden appearance of a swarm of armed boats can transform routine navigation into a moment of crisis. And once again, the goal is not always destruction, it is intimidation. Every close encounter sends another signal to shipping companies and insurers that the Strait of Hormuz is becoming unpredictable. Then there are the missiles. Iran possesses one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East. Thousands of ballistic and cruise missiles are believed to be stored across the country, many of them capable of reaching targets throughout the Gulf. Some launch systems are mobile, able to move through mountainous terrain along the coastline. Others are positioned near hardened facilities overlooking the strait. From these positions, missiles can threaten shipping lanes, ports, and energy infrastructure across the region, which introduces another layer of pressure. Because Iran's strategy is not only about targeting ships, it is about making the entire regional energy system feel vulnerable. Refineries, export terminals, oil storage hubs, liquefied natural gas facilities. If those systems appear at risk, the ripple effects spread through global markets immediately. Even the suggestion that major energy infrastructure could be targeted is enough to send oil prices climbing. But the most powerful weapon in this strategy may not be drones, missiles, or fast boats. It may be something far less visible. Insurance. Every major commercial vessel operating in international waters carries insurance coverage. For oil tankers and cargo ships worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that coverage is essential. Without it, shipping companies simply cannot operate. No responsible operator will send a ship through a region where the financial risk of destruction is unprotected. And the companies that provide this insurance constantly monitor geopolitical risk. If attacks begin occurring, the cost of coverage rises sharply. If the risk becomes too high, insurers may simply refuse to cover voyages through that region at all. Once that happens, the consequences are immediate. Captains cannot sail, cargo contracts freeze, shipping companies issue new instructions, drop anchor, hold position, wait. This is how a waterway can be shut down without a single physical barrier. A few targeted attacks, a few drones in the sky, a few encounters with armed speedboats. And suddenly the calculations in the insurance markets shift. The Strait of Hormuz becomes too dangerous to insure. And when that happens, ships stop moving. Which is exactly what observers began to see across the Gulf. Tankers waiting, cargo vessels circling, hundreds of ships suspended in a strange maritime limbo. The strait itself remained open, but the confidence required to sail through it had begun to collapse. As this paralysis spread, energy markets began reacting immediately. Oil traders started pricing in the possibility of a major supply disruption. Governments began reviewing emergency reserves. Naval forces across the region quietly increased readiness levels. Everyone understood something important. What was unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz was not a series of random incidents. It was a strategy. A strategy designed to exploit the narrowest and most vulnerable choke point, and the most dangerous part had not yet been used. Because beneath the surface of the Gulf lies a weapon capable of turning uncertainty into total paralysis. Sea mines, thousands of them. Weapons capable of transforming 21 miles of water into a lethal maze where every passing ship risks catastrophic destruction. If those mines enter the water, the temporary hesitation could turn into something far more severe, a shutdown that lasts months. As the number of ships waiting continued to grow, a deeper fear began spreading through energy markets and naval centers. The disruption had relied mostly on intimidation, drones, harassment, missile threats. But sea mines could transform uncertainty into total shutdown. In naval warfare, mines are among the simplest weapons ever created. Yet they remain one of the most effective. A sea mine does not chase its target. It waits. Hidden beneath the surface, it sits silently until a ship passes overhead. When the metal hull of a vessel triggers its sensors, the explosion can tear open the bottom of even the largest tanker. In narrow waterways like the Strait of Hormuz, mines are uniquely devastating. The strait is a confined corridor. Supertankers carrying 2 million barrels of oil cannot weave through narrow channels. They follow established lanes, only a few miles wide. Those lanes become perfect targets. Intelligence estimates suggest Iran possesses thousands of naval mines across its facilities. Some are traditional moored mines. Others sit quietly on the seabed and detonate when they detect the acoustic signature of passing engines. Some use magnetic sensors that react to the metal mass of a large ship moving overhead. In Hormuz, they can paralyze everything. One explosion would be enough. Shipping companies would halt traffic immediately. Insurance markets would shut down coverage entirely. Navies would have to begin large-scale mine-clearing operations before commercial traffic could safely resume. And clearing mines is slow, dangerous work. Specialized minesweeper vessels move cautiously, using sonar systems. Each mine must be neutralized individually. Each section of water cleared step by step. This process could take months. History offers a warning. During the 1980s, attacks on oil shipments turned the Persian Gulf into the tanker war. In 1988, the American warship USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine. The explosion nearly sank the vessel. It demonstrated how devastating even a single mine could be. Today, the stakes would be far higher. The global economy has become vastly more dependent on energy flowing through the Gulf. Asian economies rely heavily on Gulf oil. European markets depend increasingly on liquefied natural gas shipments. Any prolonged disruption could ripple across the global economy. Energy traders understand this better than anyone, which is why markets react instantly to even the suggestion that the Strait of Hormuz might become unsafe. As ships remained anchored outside the strait, oil prices began climbing sharply. Traders started pricing in the possibility that millions of barrels per day could disappear from global supply. Governments began calculating how long their strategic reserves could last. Because for many countries, the Strait of Hormuz represents a single point of failure in the global energy system. If that point collapses, the shock spreads everywhere. Manufacturing slows, transportation costs surge, electricity prices rise, and governments scramble to secure alternative supply routes. But alternatives are limited. Saudi Arabia operates pipelines that move some oil to ports on the Red Sea. The United Arab Emirates has built a route connecting Abu Dhabi's oil fields to the port of Fujairah outside the Gulf. Yet even operating at full capacity, these systems can only carry a fraction of the oil that normally passes through Hormuz. The rest must travel through the strait, which is why this narrow stretch of water is the world's most dangerous choke point. Not because it is always at war, but because the consequences of disruption are so enormous. Back on the ships waiting outside the passage, crews watch the horizon and wait. Tankers loaded with crude oil sit idle under the heat of the Gulf sun. Cargo vessels drift slowly in open water. Every captain is waiting for the same signal: clearance to proceed, confirmation that the water ahead is safe. But that signal depends on something far larger than any single ship. It depends on whether the fragile balance between deterrence and escalation in the Persian Gulf holds. Because if mines appear in the water, the temporary paralysis spreading across the strait could harden into something far worse: a complete shutdown. And the consequences of that shutdown would not remain confined to the Middle East. They would ripple across the entire global economy: factories in Asia, airports in Europe, shipping networks across the Pacific, energy markets everywhere, all connected to this narrow strip of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Across the Persian Gulf, the ships are still waiting. From space, the scene looks almost unreal. Tankers and cargo vessels scattered across the water, drifting outside the entrance. Hundreds of millions of barrels of oil, billions of dollars in cargo, all paused, waiting. Because somewhere in Tehran, a decision was made to test just how vulnerable the global system really is, whether a handful of drones, fast boats, missiles, and the threat of mines could turn the world's busiest waterways into a zone of hesitation, whether uncertainty alone could slow the flow of energy that powers modern civilization. The ships floating quietly outside the Strait of Hormuz are the visible sign of that experiment, and the longer they remain there, the more the world is reminded of a simple geopolitical truth. In an interconnected global economy, the most powerful weapons are not always the largest. Sometimes they are the ones that exploit geography, psychology, and the fragile confidence that keeps global trade moving. Because you do not always need to close a choke point with warships to disrupt the world. Sometimes you only need to make the world believe the water ahead is no longer safe to cross.